everyone. This is Michael Robbins, broadcasting from the Little Bear Meditation Center here in northern Finland, north of the Arctic Circle. Tuija and I have been offering these Ask programs centered around the idea of invocation. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you. This is Saturday, for us at least. Maybe for some people in Australia, New Zealand, it's a bit later, Sunday morning. But on Saturday nights here in Europe, at least, we offer the invocation of the soul of nations, and we look at the possibility that humanity will be wise enough in its national life to learn to invoke the higher qualities which are associated with the soul. We know how much division and acrimony and hatred and separativeness there is in the world at this time. It's all coming to the surface. It's rather inevitable before the reappearance of the Christ and before the first initiation. These things are actually rather equivalent, because when the Christ appears, it will indicate that humanity, at least in its upper brackets, has taken the first initiation. Well, in any case, before that initiation, before that reappearance, the powers of Pluto and Vulcan are extremely strong, and they are responsible for a kind of cleansing that humanity must pass through, and that the individual candidate for initiation must pass through. We will soon again be offering the invocation of the soul of nations, specific nations. Right now we've been working in the destiny of the nations with some readings, and we've been working slowly through the contrast between the 6th and 7th rays. I'll deal probably simply with one paragraph here tonight, and then we'll get on to a meditation which will deal with some of the kinds of tragedies which are occurring and the extreme distress that some people find themselves in at the moment, especially in the Middle East, which is one of the, somewhere there, you know, perhaps in the Palestinian area, or what the Tibetan calls Old Palestine. You know, it includes all of those countries, and specifically in Syria and Iraq at this time. There is a point of a triangle of evil, and that is acting itself out at the moment. He says that the former Holy Land is no longer a holy land at all. And that in fact very difficult forces are now at play there, and we see the possibility that a great global conflict could ignite through the processes that are occurring there between the different nations, possibly bringing in Russia and the United States, and who knows, even China. So we must pass through this challenge, and we must make choices in our elections, and in our selection of people to represent us, which truly represent the soul of our nations and not the personality. The United States, for instance, faces exactly such a choice at this time. Well, anyway, let's read a little bit about this point in planetary history at which we find ourselves. He says a most interesting and crucial period in racial and planetary history. Even though this was written maybe 70 years ago, we're still exactly in that transition time between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. And hopefully, because this transition is ruled in part by Libra, there will be some kind of harmonization which begins to occur. What I'll do is I'll change the text here so you can look at this as I read it and comment on it. This is a period unlike any which has preceded it. We understand that when the hierarchy first came to Earth, it looked forward some 18.5 million years exactly to this time, which would be the transition of the then becoming human kingdom into the kingdom of souls. It's taken us all this many million years for humanity as a whole to begin to move into the kingdom of souls in any relatively large measure. So it's unlike any period which has preceded it, and for that reason the evolutionary process has been definitely successful, in spite of all failures, mistakes, and delays. Well, when we see the work of Vulcan with all its weaponry and Pluto with all of its drastic revelations of the unredeemed past of individuals and groups, we're liable to take a pessimistic point of view, but okay. In fact, he encourages us to see that there has been success, and what seems to be is not always what is in essence. So we have to look for the true condition of the human being, of humanity, which is now shaking off many of its old failures, mistakes, and delays. Yes, there have been those. He says, of these latter, there have been many owing to the refusal. Now this is interesting, curious, and difficult to understand in your eyes, of the capital E energies concentrated at Shambhala, the so-called lights which carry out the will of God. There's been a refusal to impose the force of will on matter and on form until such a time as this can be done with the cooperation of the human family. Now, we notice there was a Shambhala impact in Lemurian times. It accounted for the destruction of that civilization. There was a Shambhala impact at the time of the floods, the various floods in Atlantis. I'm not sure exactly which one. We'd have to consult The Hidden History of Humanity. Philip Lindsay has a marvelous book out on that. But in any case, the floods were caused by a Shambhalic impact. And now, in our modern time, after waiting millions of years between them, there was one in 1825, there was one in 1975, one in the year 2000, who knows, 2025, so many coming in a crescendo, and even World War II may have been the result of some sort of Shambhalic influence. DK hints at this. So anyway, we human beings are becoming more cognizant of the possibility of knowing what the divine plan is, and we can cooperate with the will of God in some small measure. This has never been hitherto possible owing to the unpreparedness of man for the task and his ignorance as to the plan. Now, DK has done so much to present to us something about the nature of the divine plan, and that has been very important. The Lord of Shambhala, Sanat Kumara, and his helpers, notice how he capitalizes these words, have had to wait until at least the dim outlines of the plan had penetrated through into the consciousness of the race. And here we are, light, love, and power, the great invocation has come forth and shown us that illumination, loving relationships, right human relationships, and sacrificial will, a kind of will that cares about the whole and not just about the part. These are the ingredients of the divine plan, and we somewhat understand that, at least we begin to. So this is beginning to happen with increasing frequency, and from day to day, more and more intelligent men and women are coming or being brought into touch with the emerging ideas of the hierarchy, the great mediating body, as we cannot stand too much of the direct Shambhala impact. We look therefore for the steady appearance, gradually and cautiously applied, of the will energy of the highest center, Shambhala, which is to be found upon this planet. Now, it doesn't have to be applied in the kind of terrible destruction which is raining down upon so many people of the world in the form of bombs and poison gas and all kinds of dreadful, horrific, lethal means which enforce the little ego will of certain despots and people who do not have the soul vision. This is what we're facing right now. It's kind of a shambolic influence, but it is misappropriated. This center, Shambhala, corresponds to the monadic center, which makes its power felt in the consciousness of the disciple who is ready for the third initiation. Now, humanity is not ready for the third initiation, but certain members of humanity are, and in fact, a considerable number of masters will be needed shortly, DK tells us, and so the training is intensifying. Once the second initiation has been taken, the watching hierarchy can begin to note the constant reorientation of the soul towards the monad, towards Sanat Kumara, towards identification, towards realization of the whole. And so many of DK's students were in his groups and approaching the second initiation, whether in this life or a few lives to come. And maybe that is true of quite a number of his students. And the attractive power of that highest aspect over the initiate. So this is what it's the will of God we're interested in here, especially when we begin to think of the destiny of the nations. Today, so many members of the human family in incarnation and or out of incarnation have taken the first two initiations. That the attention of Shambhala is being increasingly turned to humanity via the hierarchy, the mediating and buffering body of love and wisdom, while simultaneously the thoughts of men are being turned to the plan, to the use of the will in direction and guidance, and to the nature of dynamic force. Now, we don't want this to get out of hand, of course. We have the weaponry in which this could occur, and the destruction of humanity at this time is a great possibility, and hopefully this can be avoided. I think this is what the reappearance of the Christ is largely all about. The quality, for instance, of the explosive and dynamic nature of war in this century, that's the 20th century, is indicative of this, of the application of shambolic energy, and of the intervention of that dynamic will in the affairs of men. So the will energy is, in one of its aspects, is an expression of death and destruction. Of course, there's the will to be also, the will to good also, as well as the will to destroy. It's kind of the third aspect of the first ray force. The first ray is, after all, the ray of the destroyer, but it has its constructive aspect as well under Vulcan. What can therefore be seen occurring is the effect of the Shambhala force upon the forms in nature, due to the misuse of the incoming energy by man. So it's a great energy, but we don't know yet how to use it. We must learn, and disciples in the world can help. Once we learn what it is and can explain it and demonstrate it to humanity. War in the past, speaking generally and esoterically, has been based consistently upon the attractive power of possessions, a very Taurian kind of motivation. And this has led to the aggressive and grasping character of the motives which have led to war. Hitler was a Taurus, and so many of those Nazis in that group had powerful earth signs. And there was this will to have more room to live, Lebensraum, so to speak, and to acquire the natural resources of other countries, even though the ideology was still stronger than the will to possess. Gradually, there has been a change coming about, and war has lately been founded upon somewhat higher motives, and the acquisition of more land and territorial possessions has not been the true and main motive, though it has been present. War has been prompted by economic necessity, or it has been in the nature of the imposition of the will of some nation or group of nations and their desire to impose some ideology or other upon some nation, or to rid itself of a worn-out system of thought, of government or religious dogma, which is holding back the racial development. You can see the progression there, always higher, and, you know, revolutions come along and the old is thrown off. Even wars for the sake of ideology are occurring on a higher level than wars simply for crude acquisition. This is being now consciously done and is an expression of the Shambhala or will force, and is not so definitely the desire force of the past. Well, okay, this will be our reading for this session, and I'll just say that we're ending here. Let's see if I can get this straight. I'm not a finished typewriter. Ending of Destiny of the Nations reading, and this is, we're just about to enter Scorpio, as you understand, probably, you know, just a few hours away from that. So it's an important sign when we want to deal with the possible triumph of the good over evil. We'll get more into the seventh ray and its contrast with the sixth, as you see that coming up when we meet again in a week. So now what we'll do, with these ideas in mind, is we will turn our attention to the difficult circumstances in which some people find themselves apparently helplessly. We have the acting out through Pluto and Vulcan of a very strong inhumane force. It seems like the desire to remain in power and to impose the will upon others for the sake of certain ideologies. Now, you know, in the Middle East there is a tremendous divide, even in the Islamic faith, between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and they have some kind of understanding of how the power should have been handed down since the death of Muhammad, and that conception differs. And so different ideologies have formed and different systems of thought, and there's war going on right in the heart of the Islamic faith, not to mention its relations with others. So at the moment we have not the soul demonstrating. At the moment we have people in terrible distress. They are leaving in their tens of thousands these cities which are subject to bombardment and to gassing and to all of the horrific means of imposing one national will upon a group of people. Of course, the karmic factors exist, but we have to realize that the Armageddon, which is proposed as a possibility in the Christian Bible, could begin in the area of Syria, and that is why it is so a dangerous contention which is there occurring. Now what we want to do is to think of the soul of humanity. So we'll enter our little reflection, our little meditation here, our realization that if there must be war, it should be really to overthrow what is unjust and imposed upon others for the sake of the welfare of the few. And there are other ways to deal with that as well. War will become obsolete, and it is said that they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks and practice war no more. The period of 1,000 years of peace, and that's simply a symbolic figure, will supervene during the period of the reappearance of the Christ. And hopefully, by the time we reach the final decade of Aquarius, ruled by Venus, there will be something we call the era of brotherly love, which will be very different from anything we have seen before. But we have to get there, and we have to invoke the soul of nations, the soul of humanity as a whole, and align ourselves with the great Lord Maitreya to do so. And that's what we're doing right now as we think of all the suffering that is occurring and the terrible conditions which are decimating men, women, and children in these places where they are relatively trapped under brutal conditions. You've probably read about how many are being executed summarily and how human shields are being used by the ISIL group. When I think about that group, I think is ill, indeed, is ill. There's a sick ideology which animates them. So we work with the Christ, and we invoke his presence. And we, as souls and together, and in the sight of hierarchy, we say, in the direction of the Christ, we have gathered in your name, Lord Maitreya, be with us. And we think of the network of triangles which we are participating in and which should be a conduit for the energies of the soul, because in a way the word triangle is equivalent to the word soul. The souls are known as the triangles, and the true soul, or the true ego, is the spiritual triad. So the higher sacrificial will, the love and wisdom, and the true light, these must circulate through our triangles in which we participate, and which is leading us and our entire planet towards sacredness. We're on our way. We're working through the various planetary centers wherever we are. New York, London, Geneva, those are the ones that probably most of us are working through, but eventually Darjeeling and Tokyo will be involved. So we think about the beautiful fourth ray soul of humanity, harmony, beauty, art, harmony through conflict, the ability to take dreadful situations and turn them into harmony. Eventually it will be a second ray soul governing the human race, but we think about the Christ aspect, which cares about every single human being regardless of the karmic record. All will be redeemed necessarily under the Christ impulse as it continues even beyond the present Lord Maitreya. It will always be there. And the soul of our planet is the second ray soul, the redeeming soul. DK sometimes calls it the major ray of our planet. So we tune in with the Christ and with love wisdom, and we think about the excuse me, the dreadful situation of so many people who cannot escape and who are being summarily executed simply because of their faith. How the water is cut off, how the food is cut off, and many of the others who managed to escape in their thousands, running for their lives somewhere. In all this dreadful situation, we imagine the Christ energy entering. Of course, as the word Christ, he would be rejected in that area. Maybe as the Imam Mahdi, he would not be rejected, but it's all one being, all one individuality, carrying the planetary and even the cosmic note of love. So we infuse that area of the world with its tremendous misfortunes with the love wisdom energy. And we imagine it transforming the motivations of those who are struggling under barbaric circumstances. You might think that the Christ energy could never deal with such violence and such hatred and such separativeness, but precisely it is the energy which can. And to those who suffer, let some comfort come to them through the energy of love wisdom, even though they might not know its source or really what it is. And for those who are so brutally imposing their will with weaponry, we ask that some larger understanding enter their egotistical will to power. And may the Christ energy enter humanity so largely that the United Nations itself will have the power to force by moral law, by moral example, the cessation of the kinds of hostilities which are caused by egotistical imposition of the will and narrow, hyper-intense ideology. So it's as if the Christ is in the midst of all that fray. And as karma works itself out, and as the lower tendencies of certain human beings work themselves out, we look that evil shall be turned to good. And that the peace that is so long desired and is the will of Shambhala will emerge in this very dangerous time when the very fate of humanity, if we could but realize it, hangs in the balance. So let love stream forth into the hearts of men. And may the centers above the diaphragm control the selfishness of the tendencies of the centers below the diaphragm. So throw your energy, your good soul energy, into that situation. We cannot know the results, but we know the results are there. He for whom the whole world waits has said that whatsoever shall be asked in his name, with faith in the response, shall see it accomplished. And thus we work subjectively and with confidence, realizing that our subtle methods can have and will have their proper effect within all the nations of the world, and especially those that are most troubled by the eruption of the forces of evil. There is the image of the Christ as if etherically standing within the body of the planet and radiating the healing, refining, uplifting energies which are needed to bring the shambolic peace to humanity. Let us not struggle and suffer unnecessarily. Let us be proactive here. Let us not always have to learn the hard way. And let the disciples of the world, unlike what they were able to do to forestall the Second World War, do everything they can, subjectively and together and with faith and confidence, to forestall and eradicate the possibility of any Third World War, a war which must not happen if humanity as we know it is to survive. And let all nations live up to the idealism of their flags and find harmony between these ideals. Now we will hear the great invocation, the light, love, and power, the three major constituents of the divine plan. We want to thank you for attending this meditation. Keep in mind all times, whenever you can, the global picture and those who are suffering due to evil and ignorance. It need not be that way, and we disciples can make a difference through our subtle work together. Tomorrow evening we will resume at 5 p.m. GMT with the attraction of money for hierarchical purposes. Then the next week there will be the 5 a.m. shift, so to speak, and hopefully those times, one of them at least, will allow you to participate in these very important meditations which DK said we must sustain, especially the reappearance of the Christ and the attracting of money for hierarchical purposes, but of course we reinforce that with the indispensable triangles work and with the work of invoking the souls of nations, and of course the dissipation of glamour, which is so utterly essential if the nations are to be able to express their soul. So we will just go forward with a few slides, and that will be the end of our process for this evening, at least here in the far north of Finland at the Little Bear Meditation Center. Many blessings from Tuija and myself.